Well, 3 years ago, the arrival of 5 red heifers in Israel attracted global attention. Well, today, those cows are an ancient.
So this is a flag of the third temple, which we want to build hopefully here on the Temple Mount.
The clock of the time seems to be ticking forward at a pace that is prompting many to ask questions. Just about a month and a half after the first one, a second red heifer has been confirmed born in Israel. Thousands of Jews, including high-ranking political figures, have visited the Temple Mount and engaged in public religious activities. Meanwhile, preparatory groups have spent tens of millions of dollars crafting all the sacrificial implements from real gold, following biblical descriptions. Do these developments reflect a preparation of deeper significance for those who believe in biblical prophecy? Now, hit like this video, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. While the world was still trying to process the appearance of the first red heifers, a new announcement from the Temple Institute added another layer of tension to an already highly charged atmosphere in the Middle East. Only about a month and a half after the first event, a second red heifer was officially confirmed to have been born in the strategically significant Golan Heights. For some Orthodox Jewish groups and temple movement organizations, this is not simply a natural occurrence. They view it as a powerful, heavenly sign evidence in their understanding that the process of restoring ritual purity in preparation for the rebuilding of the Third Temple may be moving forward at a pace not seen in 2,000 years. Yet behind that excitement lies a serious religious legal debate rooted in halakha, taking place among rabbinic authorities. The reason comes down to one unusual biological detail. The red heifer was reportedly born as a twin alongside a male calf. According to ancient Jewish religious law, certain conditions associated with twin births can raise questions about the animal's physical development and reproductive characteristics. Because of this, leading religious scholars have been examining a difficult question. Could characteristics associated with its twin birth be considered a blemish that would disqualify the animal from being used for the red heifer ritual? According to the strict requirements traditionally associated with the red heifer ceremony, an eligible animal must meet several demanding conditions. First, it must be completely red. The requirement is so strict that even a small number of hairs of another color may raise questions about its eligibility. Second, it must be without blemish, tamima. Its entire body must meet the required standard, without unusual markings, physical abnormalities, or other characteristics that could disqualify it under Jewish religious law. Third, it must be free from significant defects or disease. A physical condition, injury, or other defect could potentially affect its eligibility for the ritual. And fourth, it must never have carried a yoke or been used for labor. The animal must remain completely unused for agricultural or other work, preserving the condition required by the traditional regulations. So the question surrounding this second red heifer is not simply whether it is red enough. It is whether the animal can ultimately satisfy the complex combination of biological, physical, and halakhic requirements surrounding the ancient ritual. And if it does pass that scrutiny, the discovery could become another significant development for those who believe the ancient preparations connected to the Third Temple are moving closer to reality. While religious debates surrounding the red heifer continue, another development on the Temple Mount within the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound has continued to draw international attention. During Tisha B'Av, a large number of Jewish visitors entered the compound, with estimates ranging from approximately 3,200 to more than 4,000 people. Notably, among those present was Israel's National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who entered the site under the protection of Israeli police forces. The event drew particular attention because Jewish prayers and religious practices took place at a site that holds profound significance for both Jews and Muslims. For decades, the Temple Mount has been governed under a complex status quo arrangement in which the religious activities and prayer practices of different communities are shaped by long-standing regulations and traditions. The presence of a senior Israeli government official at the site therefore quickly drew reactions from Palestinian authorities, Jordan, and several Muslim-majority countries. They argued that such activities could alter the fragile balance that has been maintained at the site and called for the existing status quo arrangements to be respected. For those closely following developments surrounding Jerusalem and biblical prophecy, the event is particularly notable because it comes at a time when discussions surrounding the Temple Mount, ancient rituals, and the possibility of a third temple have become increasingly prominent. Then there is the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, where preparations have gone far beyond books, drawings, and historical research. More than 90 ritual objects have reportedly been prepared according to traditional descriptions of temple worship. Among them is the massive 7-branched golden menorah, crafted from gold, alongside priestly garments, musical instruments, vessels, and other sacred objects intended for temple service. And this is what makes the story so remarkable. These objects are not being created merely as museum pieces to remember a vanished civilization. The stated purpose of the Temple Institute is to prepare items that could potentially be used in future temple worship. In other words, while the temple itself does not yet stand on the Temple Mount, many of the things that would be needed for its rituals have already been painstakingly prepared. For centuries, the destruction of the Second Temple seemed like the end of an ancient chapter. But today, in the heart of Jerusalem, people are once again studying the garments of the priests, recreating sacred vessels, preparing ritual objects, and speaking openly about the possibility of a future temple. The building may not exist yet, but the preparations surrounding it are no longer merely theoretical, and that raises an extraordinary question. If the physical tools for temple worship are already being prepared, and religious leaders are openly praying for the obstacles to be removed, what exactly is still missing before the third temple could become a reality? Because the answer leads us to another piece of this puzzle, one that is alive, extraordinarily rare, and mentioned directly in the ancient scriptures. What are your thoughts on this special event? Are these merely theories, or do you believe the temple will be built exactly as the Bible foretold? Please share your views in the comments section below. While a decade ago the idea of rebuilding the Third Temple was dismissed as an extremist movement or an unrealistic fantasy, it has now moved to the very heart of the Israeli government's power structure. The people who openly advocate for a greater Jewish presence on the Temple Mount are no longer operating entirely on the edges of Israeli society. Some of their strongest political allies now sit inside the highest levels of government, turning an idea once considered too controversial for mainstream politics into a subject of national debate. And nowhere is that transformation more visible than on the Temple Mount itself. For decades, the site has been governed through a delicate and highly sensitive arrangement commonly referred to as the status quo. Under this framework, the Islamic Waqf has maintained religious administration of the compound, while Israeli authorities have maintained security control. Jewish visitors have generally been permitted to enter during designated hours, but overt Jewish prayer and religious rituals have traditionally been restricted. The reason is simple. On this tiny piece of land, even a seemingly symbolic change can carry consequences far beyond Jerusalem. But in recent years, that boundary has increasingly been challenged. Videos and reports have shown Jewish visitors praying, bowing, and in some cases prostrating themselves on the Temple Mount. Israeli police have at times allowed or protected such acts rather than immediately intervening. Religious gatherings involving Jewish prayer and other expressions of worship have become increasingly visible, creating the perception among many observers that the practical reality on the ground is changing, even though Israeli authorities continue to state that the formal status quo has not been officially abolished. That distinction is crucial. The status quo has not simply been destroyed by an official government decree, but the growing number of incidents involving Jewish prayer has intensified the debate over whether the traditional restrictions are gradually being weakened in practice. To supporters of expanded Jewish prayer rights, this represents religious freedom being restored. To Palestinian leaders, Jordan, and many Muslim communities, it represents a dangerous challenge to an arrangement designed to prevent the holy site from becoming the trigger for a much wider conflict. Then came one of the most politically significant voices in this debate, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Ben-Gvir has repeatedly argued that Jews should have greater rights to pray on the Temple Mount. In public appearances, he has made clear that he believes Jewish worship should not be treated as inherently inferior to Muslim worship at the site. His position has placed him directly at the center of one of Israel's most explosive religious and political controversies, and his statements have repeatedly drawn condemnation from Palestinian officials and neighboring Arab states. When those statements are placed alongside Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's public comments about providing funding for the temple, the significance becomes difficult to overlook. Two influential ministers are no longer discussing the Third Temple as something belonging only to ancient history. They are connecting the subject to modern questions of sovereignty, religious rights, public policy, and national identity. Yet this does not mean that Israel has officially decided to build a third temple. There is no approved government construction project on the Temple Mount, and the existing Islamic holy sites remain in place. The political reality is far more complicated. What has changed is the position of the conversation itself. An idea that once existed largely within religious activist circles has moved closer to the center of Israeli political debate. And perhaps that is the most important update of all. The Third Temple does not need to be under construction for the political landscape surrounding it to change. Before concrete is poured, before foundations are laid, and before a single stone is moved, political boundaries have to shift first. And in Jerusalem, those boundaries are now being tested in ways that would have been difficult to imagine only a decade ago. But this brings us to an even more sensitive question. If Jewish prayer continues to expand on the Temple Mount, and if political leaders continue demanding greater access and religious rights, what happens to the Islamic holy sites that already stand there? Because beneath every discussion about a future Third Temple lies one unavoidable reality. The Temple Mount is already occupied by sacred places belonging to another faith, and that is where this story becomes far more dangerous. There is another detail in this story that receives far less attention than the red heifer itself. It is not the animal. It is not the ashes. It is not even the priests. It is the location where the ceremony would take place. According to the traditional interpretation of Numbers 19, the red heifer ritual was to be performed outside the camp in a location facing the sanctuary. And that geographical detail has led temple advocates to focus intensely on one particular place overlooking the old city of Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives. From the slopes of the Mount of Olives, the ancient Temple Mount is directly visible across the Kidron Valley. The relationship between these two locations is not merely geographical. In Jewish tradition, the Mount of Olives has been associated with some of the most important events in Jerusalem's religious history. At the same time, the eastern side of the mountain faces the area traditionally identified with the ancient temple. For those preparing for the restoration of temple rituals, that line of sight carries enormous significance. This is where the story becomes remarkably specific. Organizations connected with the temple movement have spent years studying the practical requirements of the red heifer ceremony. Questions that might sound insignificant to an ordinary observer suddenly become critical. Where should the altar stand? What should its dimensions be? How should the priests approach the site? What should they be able to see from the place of sacrifice? How can the ritual be performed while maintaining the traditional relationship between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount? According to Temple Institute materials and reports from supporters of the movement, preparations have included identifying suitable locations on the Mount of Olives and studying the geography necessary for a potential future ceremony. Models and reconstructions of the altar have also been prepared to enable the ritual to be practiced according to traditional specifications. But there is an important distinction here. Claims that a fully operational red heifer altar has already been secretly constructed on privately acquired land, or that everything is ready for an immediate official sacrifice on the Mount of Olives, should be treated carefully unless independently verified. The temple movement has publicly discussed and prepared for the ceremony, but that is not the same thing as an officially authorized temple sacrifice being imminent. And that distinction makes the recent rehearsal at Shiloh even more interesting. The purpose of a rehearsal is not simply to create dramatic images. It is to discover problems before the real event. Priests can practice the sequence, participants can learn their positions, equipment can be tested, the procedure can be examined from beginning to end. If an animal eventually satisfies all the traditional requirements, the people involved would already have experience performing the ceremony rather than attempting it for the first time. Now imagine the symbolism of the location. Behind the priest stands the ancient landscape of Jerusalem. Across the valley rises the Temple Mount. Beyond it stands the Old City. And directly along that ancient line of sight is the place where Jewish tradition remembers the temple once stood. For believers watching these developments through the lens of prophecy, the image is almost impossible to ignore. A ceremony described in an ancient biblical text being studied, rehearsed, and prepared for in the very landscape where the ancient temple once dominated Jerusalem. But there is still one enormous obstacle. Even if a qualifying red heifer were found, even if the ritual were successfully performed, and even if all the preparations were completed, none of that automatically gives anyone the authority to build a third temple on the Temple Mount. The political, religious, and security consequences would be enormous. And that is precisely why the next question becomes even more important. If the preparations are advancing on one side of Jerusalem, while another sacred structure already occupies the center of the Temple Mount, how close can this process actually come before the entire region is forced to respond? So why would anyone say that the third temple could begin almost immediately once the final obstacles are removed? The answer is not that ancient Israel possessed some mysterious technology that allowed Solomon or Zerubbabel to construct a temple overnight. It is that the world of temple preparation today is completely different from the world of thousands of years ago. Modern engineering, digital modeling, prefabrication, and advanced construction techniques could theoretically transform a project that once required years of manual labor into something far more rapid. Organizations associated with the temple movement have spent years studying what a future temple could look like. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has produced detailed architectural concepts, models, diagrams, and educational reconstructions based on biblical descriptions and traditional Jewish sources. Modern computer technology makes it possible to visualize the structure in 3 dimensions, examine individual components, and plan construction long before a single foundation is laid. And this is where the story becomes particularly fascinating. Imagine a construction project in which the architects are not beginning with a blank sheet of paper. The design has already been studied, the dimensions have already been modeled. Individual components can potentially be manufactured away from the construction site and transported into position. Modern prefabrication techniques allow sections of a building to be produced in controlled environments and assembled rapidly once the site is ready. That is dramatically different from the ancient world. Thousands of years ago, enormous quantities of stone had to be quarried, transported, shaped, and fitted largely through manual labor. Skilled craftsmen spent years working on individual elements. Roads, cranes, machinery, computer models, and modern logistics did not exist. Every major component had to be created almost entirely on site. Today, construction technology has fundamentally changed that equation. Large structural components can be engineered digitally before production. Materials can be cut with extraordinary precision. Modular systems can be manufactured simultaneously in different locations. Heavy equipment can move enormous loads in hours that would once have required teams of workers for weeks. If the political and religious conditions for construction ever existed, the physical process could therefore be considerably faster than anything possible in the ancient world. But there is an important reality check. There is currently no officially approved Israeli government project to construct a third temple on the Temple Mount, and there is no verified construction schedule stating that the temple could be completed in a matter of weeks. Claims that the entire core structure could definitely be erected within a specific number of weeks should therefore be treated as projections or speculation rather than established fact. What is real is that the preparation movement has already invested enormous effort into studying the practical details of temple construction. The architectural vision exists, models exist, ritual objects exist, priestly garments have been prepared, training and rehearsals have taken place, and organizations dedicated to the temple have repeatedly emphasized that they do not want to be caught unprepared if circumstances ever change. This creates an extraordinary contrast. The physical temple is absent, but much of the infrastructure surrounding the idea of the temple is already being developed. And that is why the phrase, "Third Temple begins," can be so powerful as a headline. It does not necessarily mean that construction has already started. It can describe something more subtle, the transition from an ancient memory into a modern preparation project. For those who believe biblical prophecy points toward a future physical temple, this distinction is extremely significant. If the necessary religious objects are ready, if ritual procedures are being rehearsed, if architectural plans have been studied, and if modern construction technology could accelerate the physical process, then the question becomes less about whether humanity possesses the ability to build such a structure. The question becomes whether the political and religious conditions will ever allow it to happen. But what is happening in Jerusalem does not end at the borders of Israel. Thousands of miles away, another movement has been watching these developments with extraordinary interest. A network of Christian supporters, particularly within parts of the Western evangelical world, who see the future of Jerusalem as deeply connected to biblical prophecy. For some of these believers, supporting Israel is not simply a matter of foreign policy or cultural solidarity. They believe Jerusalem occupies a unique place in God's prophetic plan, and that developments surrounding the Temple Mount deserve to be watched with unusual attention. Over the years, Christian organizations and private donors from countries such as the United States and Canada have provided financial and practical support to organizations connected with Israel, including groups involved in temple-related education and preparation. Some supporters have contributed toward the recreation of priestly garments, sacred vessels, educational programs, archaeological projects, and other preparations associated with the temple movement. Not every Christian supporter shares the same theology, and not every organization involved in supporting Israel supports rebuilding the temple. But there is a significant prophetic movement within evangelical Christianity that views the restoration of temple worship as an important piece of the biblical puzzle. For these believers, the story becomes much larger than Jerusalem itself. They look at the ancient promises concerning Israel, the prophetic passages concerning Jerusalem, and the New Testament warnings about the final days, and they see a possible sequence beginning to emerge. In their interpretation, a future temple would provide the setting for events described in passages such as Daniel 9, Matthew 24, and 2 Thessalonians 2. This is why every development involving the Temple Mount, the priesthood, the red heifer, or preparations for temple worship can suddenly become international news within Christian communities around the world. But there is an important distinction that must be made. The Bible does not explicitly say that modern evangelical Christians must finance a third temple, nor does it say that moving the present Islamic structures is a confirmed prophetic requirement. Those ideas come from particular interpretations of biblical prophecy. Different Christian traditions understand these passages in very different ways, and many Christians do not believe that a physical third temple is necessary for biblical prophecy to be fulfilled. Still, one interpretation has become especially influential among prophecy-focused Christians: the belief that a future ruler will rise during a period of extraordinary global turmoil and deception. This is where the story takes a darker turn. In Daniel 9, the prophet describes a coming period associated with a covenant and a later interruption of sacrifice and offering. In Matthew 24, Jesus warns about the appearance of the abomination of desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, followed by a period of unprecedented tribulation. And in 2 Thessalonians 2, the Apostle Paul describes a figure known as the man of lawlessness, who exalts himself and takes his seat in the temple of God, presenting himself as God. For many Christians who interpret these passages literally and connect them, this figure is associated with the Antichrist. According to that interpretation, the future temple would become the stage for one of the most terrifying acts of deception in biblical prophecy. The Antichrist would initially appear as a powerful political figure capable of bringing order to a fractured world. Some interpretations connect him with a covenant or peace agreement involving Israel, followed later by betrayal and desecration. Imagine the implications. A city that has been divided by centuries of religious conflict suddenly experiences a political breakthrough. A historic agreement appears to bring peace. Temple worship is restored. Sacrifices resume. The world watches Jerusalem with relief, believing that perhaps the ancient conflict is finally coming to an end. And then everything changes. According to this prophetic interpretation, the apparent peacemaker reveals his true nature. The very place that was supposed to represent restored worship becomes the setting for rebellion against God. The figure enters the temple, exalts himself above God, and demands the allegiance that belongs to the Creator alone. This is why, for many Christians, the third temple is not simply a symbol of restoration. It is also a warning. The biblical message is not that Christians should become obsessed with identifying the Antichrist every time a powerful political leader appears. Jesus himself warned about deception, and Scripture repeatedly calls believers to discernment rather than speculation. The purpose of prophecy is not to give humanity a timetable that allows us to predict the exact day of Christ's return. It is a warning to remain awake when deception becomes convincing. And there is an extraordinary contrast here. Some people look at the possibility of a future temple and see the fulfillment of an ancient dream. Others see a potential flashpoint that could ignite an already unstable region. Still others see the possibility of a prophetic stage upon which the final conflict between deception and truth could unfold. But all three perspectives converge on one fact: Jerusalem matters far beyond Jerusalem. Because if the Temple Mount is the center of the religious story, the events surrounding it could potentially become part of a much larger geopolitical and spiritual confrontation. And that raises the most unsettling question yet. If the world really is moving toward a future in which Jerusalem becomes the center of a global crisis, what happens when the ancient prophecies about deception, tribulation, and the return of Christ begin to converge with the events we are witnessing today? Now step back and look at everything we have seen. A ritual involving the red heifer has been rehearsed. Temple-related organizations have spent years preparing sacred vessels, priestly garments, architectural concepts, and ritual procedures. Political leaders have spoken publicly about the temple, while the Temple Mount itself remains at the center of an increasingly intense debate over prayer, access, sovereignty, and the future of Jerusalem. Individually, none of these developments proves that the third temple is about to be constructed. The temple has not begun rising from the ground. No official Israeli government order has authorized construction on the Temple Mount, and there is no confirmed countdown showing that a groundbreaking ceremony is only days or weeks away. But when these developments are placed side by side, they reveal something that would have been difficult to imagine only a generation ago. The infrastructure surrounding the idea of the Third Temple has become remarkably tangible. The spiritual preparations are visible. The financial and political discussions are increasingly public. The ritual procedures are being studied and rehearsed. The architectural concepts have already been developed. Even the precise geography surrounding the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives has become part of detailed preparation and debate, and this is where the story becomes almost impossible to ignore. For thousands of years, the destruction of the Second Temple seemed to belong entirely to the past. The temple existed in scripture, in archaeological remains, in Jewish prayers, and in the collective memory of a people scattered across the world. Yet today, people are once again preparing priestly garments, studying ancient rituals, recreating sacred vessels, examining the requirements for purification, and publicly discussing what it would take to restore temple worship. The clock, however, is not necessarily a literal countdown. It is a metaphor for something much more profound. The possibility that an idea once considered impossible is moving closer to the realm of practical preparation. The final outcome remains unknown, and no one can honestly say when or even whether a third temple will physically rise on the Temple Mount. But Jerusalem itself remains extraordinarily volatile. The Temple Mount sits at the intersection of three major religious traditions, competing historical claims, national identity, and international politics. A seemingly small incident there can trigger protests, diplomatic crises, or violence far beyond the old city. A prayer, a political statement, a change in security arrangements, or a symbolic act can suddenly become headline news across the entire world. That is why the next move matters. Because the Third Temple does not exist yet, but the conversation surrounding it has entered a completely different era. The real question is no longer simply, will people ever talk about rebuilding the temple? They already are. The question is whether the religious preparations, political ambitions, technological capabilities, and developments surrounding the Temple Mount will eventually converge into something far more consequential. Yet as people searching for truth, we should not look at these developments with fear, panic, or endless political speculation. The red heifer, the golden vessels, the priestly garments, and even the possibility of a third temple can never replace what truly matters. For those who believe in Jesus Christ, the ultimate sacrifice has already been made once and for all on the cross. No earthly temple, no ritual, and no human institution can offer a salvation greater than the salvation that comes through him. That is why the most important response to everything happening in Jerusalem is not fear, but spiritual awakening. We should examine our hearts, turn away from sin, repent of the things that have pulled us away from God, and return to a faith that is genuine and steadfast. Jesus did not tell his followers to calculate the exact day of his return. He told us to watch, to remain faithful, and to be ready. Perhaps the world really is approaching a remarkable moment in history. Perhaps some of the events we are witnessing will eventually become part of a much larger prophetic story. But regardless of what happens next on the Temple Mount, one truth remains unchanged. Our hope is not in Jerusalem, not in a building made of stone, and not in the signs themselves. Our hope is in Jesus Christ. So keep your spiritual lamp burning, stay awake when the world becomes distracted, keep your faith when fear begins to spread, and keep your eyes fixed on Christ when uncertainty surrounds you. We may not know when the next chapter of Jerusalem's story will begin, but we can choose how we will be found when it does. Watching, faithful, and ready. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and stay with us until the very end of today's video. Your support, presence, and encouragement mean the world to us and inspire our channel to continue bringing you these deep, thought-provoking perspectives.